60 million men.
For decades, radio stations believed they controlled what people heard. If a program director banned a song, the expectation was simple: the record would vanish. But some songs refused to disappear. These are the records radio stations tried to stop and couldn't.
Look here, girls, I'm telling you now.
60 Minute Man was an R&B record built entirely on sexual boasting and double entendre. It was pulled from white-owned stations across the country, deemed too graphic, too explicit, too raw. What the stations could not prevent was its dominance on the R&B charts, where it became a massive hit. It is now frequently cited as one of the direct predecessors of rock and roll, which means that an attempt to contain it instead preserved it as a foundation stone. 3 years later, Hank Ballard pushed the door further. Work With Me, Annie was openly about sex. The lyrics did not hint. Many stations refused it entirely. What followed was a minor phenomenon in its own right.
Work with me, Annie.
The song spawned multiple answer records, the most famous being Roll With Me, Henry, and a whole informal genre of call-and-response R&B singles that flourished largely outside the reach of respectable radio. The ban did not kill the song. It generated a conversation that the stations had no way to moderate.
The Eastern world.
Skip forward a decade, and the vocabulary of banning has changed entirely. It is no longer about sex. It is about politics. Barry McGuire released Eve of Destruction in the summer of 1965, a grinding protest song about Vietnam, racial violence, and what he saw as the internal contradictions of American optimism.
Tell me over and over.
Several U.S. stations refused it on the grounds that it was unpatriotic, too negative, insufficiently uplifting. The song was even criticized in Congress. Critics and programmers alike treated it as dangerous. It still went to number one. The audience, it turned out, was not looking for reassurance.
I may not always love you.
Here is one that surprises most people. In 1966, some American radio stations hesitated to play a Beach Boys song because the word God appeared in the title. The reasoning, such as it was, had to do with stricter broadcast standards around religious language in secular entertainment. The BBC, characteristically, had its own concerns. The record was navigated carefully before it reached broad rotation. Today, God Only Knows is routinely ranked among the greatest pop songs ever recorded. The gap between how it was initially received in programming rooms and how history has judged it may be the most extreme in this entire list.
There's strange fruit.
Strange Fruit occupies a different register entirely. Columbia Records refused to record it. Holiday had to use a small independent label. When it began circulating on radio, many stations declined to air it because of the graphic and unflinching nature of its anti-lynching imagery. There was no sex, no profanity, no coded drug reference. There was only a description of what was actually happening in the American South, rendered in extended metaphor. The discomfort was the point. It became a cornerstone of civil rights musical history, but it arrived there through decades of broadcast squeamishness that said something precise about which realities radio was prepared to acknowledge.
Pastoral scene.
So far, most of these stories point to the same conclusion. Radio stations kept underestimating the audience. But those are not the stories that define this era. The cases that follow involve something harder. They involve radio stations, committees, and corporations making decisions in real time under pressure during moments of genuine crisis. And several of them involve consequences that went well beyond chart positions.
I'm only society's child.
Janis wrote Society's Child when she was 14 years old. It is a first-person account of an interracial teenage romance, told from the perspective of a white girl whose parents and friends pressure her to end the relationship. She does. The song ends in a kind of quiet defeat. Many American stations refused to play it. The reasoning, in most cases, was explicit. The song depicted interracial romance. In a number of markets, particularly in the South, it was simply pulled. But the detail that stays with you is what happened in Detroit. A Detroit station that chose to play Society's Child reportedly had its studio firebombed. Not boycotted, not petitioned, firebombed.
Only society's child.
In Boston, a journalist lost his job for writing favorably about the record. Leonard Bernstein eventually featured it on a nationally televised special. That exposure broke through some of the resistance, and the song climbed the charts. But the firebombing is the fact you do not forget. It tells you something precise about what was at stake in the decision to play or not play a record about two teenagers who were different races.
A crowd of people stood and stared.
By 1967, the BBC had a long and complicated relationship with the Beatles. It had already flagged several of their records for various reasons. I Am the Walrus had been scrutinized for drug connotations and what the BBC described as obscene imagery. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds had been targeted because censors read the initials LSD as a deliberate drug reference, a claim Lennon consistently denied, attributing the title to his son's drawing. But A Day in the Life was different. The BBC issued a formal ban. The cited concerns were two phrases: "I'd love to turn you on," and a verse involving going upstairs and having a smoke. The BBC decided in writing that this track could encourage drug use, and it placed it on the not-to-be-broadcast list. What makes this particularly striking is the context. A Day in the Life closed Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band.
Didn't notice that the lights had changed.
The album had already been previewed by BBC DJ Kenny Everett, who was specifically prohibited from playing that one track. Listeners who heard the rest of the album in advance and were told they could not hear the final song had a very clear sense of what they were being protected from. The album still sold over 1 million copies in the UK alone. The ban, in effect, became part of the record's mythology. 2 years later, many American stations banned a different Beatles track for a completely different reason. The Ballad of John and Yoko opens with the line, "Christ, you know it ain't easy," and uses the word Christ several more times throughout. Stations in the United States dropped it on blasphemy grounds. The word itself was the problem. There is an additional detail worth noting. Because of scheduling, only John Lennon and Paul McCartney were available to record the track. George Harrison and Ringo Starr were not present. The result is a song released as a Beatles single on which only two Beatles played any instruments, with McCartney handling drums, bass, piano, and backing vocals. It reached #1 in the UK. In the United States, where the blasphemy bans had taken hold, its performance lagged noticeably compared to other late-period Beatles singles.
Let me kick out the jam.
Kick Out the Jams was recorded live at the Grand Ballroom in Detroit in October 1968, and its opening line contains a profanity that made playing on mainstream radio essentially impossible. The uncensored album version could not be stocked by many retailers or spun by most stations. Arrests were reported in some markets simply for selling the record. What followed became its own story. The Detroit department store chain Hudson's refused to carry the album.
Let me kick out the jam. Yeah.
MC5 and their label, Elektra Records, responded with a full-page advertisement in a Detroit underground newspaper that read simply, "A profanity followed by Hudson's name." The store reacted by refusing to carry any Elektra Records product at all. Elektra, facing the commercial pressure of losing a major retail partner, dropped MC5 entirely. A broadcast ban had, through a chain of escalating responses, ended the band's relationship with their record label. A censored single was released with the profanity replaced by the phrase "brothers and sisters." It became a local Detroit hit. The band's national momentum, however, was effectively over. In January 1972, British soldiers shot and killed 14 unarmed civilians in Derry, Northern Ireland, in what became known as Bloody Sunday. Paul McCartney wrote and recorded "Give Ireland Back to the Irish" within weeks. It was a direct political statement by name about British policy in Northern Ireland. The BBC banned it. Radio Luxembourg banned it. Several ITV programs refused to air it. The domestic blackout in Britain was, by the standards of the era, comprehensive. What the ban could not reach was everywhere else. The record went to number 1 in Ireland. It went to number 1 in Spain. It charted in the United States. McCartney's commercial gravity was such that a song his home country's broadcasters had effectively erased from the airwaves became an international hit. And today, it rarely appears on classic rock playlists, despite being by one of the most famous musicians who ever lived. It is, in a particular sense, still partly banned, not by decree, but by omission.
You take a walk on the wild side.
This one confounds most people who know the story. "Walk on the Wild Side" references trans women, oral sex, and drug use with a directness that would have gotten almost any other record buried, and in some American markets it was restricted, but in others it was played in full. The song became Lou Reed's only major solo hit. The precise reason it slipped through where it did has remained a subject of debate for years.
Take a walk on the wild side.
Some program directors apparently did not catch the references. Others may simply not have known what they were hearing. Whatever the mechanism, the song's subversive content reached a mainstream audience largely intact, making it one of the more remarkable cases of suppression that failed before it began. On May 4, 1970, National Guard troops opened fire on student protesters at Kent State University in Ohio. 4 students were killed and 11 wounded. Neil Young quickly wrote "Ohio" within days. The recording was completed fast, pressed as a single, and on air roughly 10 days after the shootings, making it one of the quickest turnarounds from news event to vinyl in popular music history. The song directly named President Nixon, with the lyric "Tin Soldiers and Nixon's Coming," leaving no ambiguity. AM radio stations, including several in Ohio, pulled it. The official reasons, when given, cited concerns about political incitement and attacking a sitting president. But the pull revealed the local geography. Stations in Ohio, where the killings and the families of the students were, refused to play a song about those events. The survivors were in Ohio. The stations serving those communities chose silence. FM underground radio kept playing it nonstop, and the record reached the top 20 on national charts. The suppression didn't remove it. Instead, it highlighted which stations prioritized a president's comfort over their audience. The feedback loop, where bands amplified rather than silenced, was clearest here. Ohio is now taught in schools and appears in documentaries about the Vietnam era, student protest, and art's role in political crises. The stations that refused it are not remembered for that stance. The record endures. In the summer of 1968, with riots in Paris, assassinations in America, and the Democratic National Convention descending into chaos in Chicago, American radio stations faced a decision about a Rolling Stones track built around political unrest in London. Many pulled it, particularly in Chicago, citing fears that it would provoke further violence. The Stones were, by that point, one of the most commercially reliable acts on the planet. Their singles routinely dominated the charts. Street Fighting Man stalled at number 48 in the United States. That is an extraordinary underperformance for the Rolling Stones, and it is a direct consequence of those refusals. Program director memos about political sensitivity translated in concrete terms into chart positions. Mick Jagger later expressed his own ambivalence about the song. The record that stations feared would incite riots is now a staple of classic rock formats, played between car commercials and sports updates. Its original context almost entirely erased by repetition.
Is a bed and a doctor bill. I'm tired.
country radio in 1975 operated under a particular set of social assumptions. When Loretta Lynn released The Pill, a song in which a woman straightforwardly celebrates access to birth control and what it means for her freedom, many country stations refused to play it. The song was too explicit. The subject matter was inappropriate. The endorsement of women's sexual autonomy was, for a significant portion of the country format's gatekeepers, simply not something they were prepared to broadcast. Lynn later said that over a dozen of her singles had been banned at one point or another, but The Pill drew a particular intensity of response. The irony is that the refusals helped define her legacy more precisely than the plays would have. She became associated with a kind of boundary-pushing candor that her audience recognized and valued. The song is now cited in histories of both country music and reproductive politics. The stations that refuse to play it are not cited anywhere. Neil Bogart of Casablanca Records first heard the original version of Love to Love You Baby at a party. Guests repeatedly asked to hear it again. Bogart contacted Summer and producer Giorgio Moroder, requesting a longer, dance-floor-ready version. The result was a 17-minute extended track with simulated sexual pleasure described by contemporary press as containing 22 simulated orgasms. The BBC and many American stations refused to play it or aired only truncated edits. They couldn't reach the discotheque, where the full version fueled its success across European and American clubs, becoming a foundational disco record. The format meant to deliver music to the public couldn't contain it, but dance venues could. This had implications beyond chart success. The clash between broadcast standards and club culture that Love to Love You Baby exemplified was not isolated, but part of a broader shift. FM underground radio had already shown that audiences existed well beyond the top 40 format. Disco proved that club culture and broadcast culture were diverging enough for a record to amass a huge following without significant radio backing. This song shows just how much the gatekeepers were already losing control. When American radio programmers encountered Money from the Dark Side of the Moon, the problem was a single word. The lyric contained the phrase, "Do goody good bullshit," which could not air in its original form. A censored single edit was produced for radio. The edit circulated. Stations that had balked at the album version began playing the cleaned-up single. What happened next is one of the more accidental consequences in this list. Money became Pink Floyd's first major American hit single. Its presence on radio brought listeners to the Dark Side of the Moon, which then became one of the longest-charting albums in recorded history, spending over 14 years on the Billboard 200. The squeamishness about a single word had produced a workaround, and that workaround brought album-oriented rock into AM rotation in a way that would not otherwise have happened. Program directors who thought they were managing content were, without realizing it, reshaping a format. This is a smaller story, but it illustrates a practice that operated below the level of formal bands. Some American stations played an edited version of Van Morrison's Brown-Eyed Girl that removed the line about making love in the green grass. The edit circulated for years. Many listeners heard only the cleaned version on oldies radio for decades. The original line was there all along, on the album, on the original single. The edit was a quiet, semi-invisible form of censorship that required no announcement, no controversy, and no boycott. It simply became the version that played, and most people never noticed the difference. Looking back, a clear pattern emerges. Radio stations kept trying to control what audiences would hear. The reasons changed over time. Sex in the 1950s, politics and protest in the 60s, social issues in the 70s. But the result was usually the same. The songs survived. Many of the records once considered too dangerous for radio are now regarded as classics, remembered long after the institutions that tried to stop them. If you remember a record from this video, or a band you never knew about, share it in the comments and subscribe so you never miss an exploration into the stories behind the music you know and love. And if you want to keep exploring, check out this video next. Thanks for watching.